As I stood in the doorway, the weight of betrayal crashed over me like a tidal wave. It was a Friday evening, and I had just returned home from a long day at work, expecting to find my wife, Sarah, in our cozy little apartment. The familiar scent of her lavender candles filled the air, but instead of the warmth I anticipated, I felt an unsettling chill. The laughter that usually echoed in our home was replaced by an unsettling silence, and a knot formed in my stomach. The moment I stepped inside, I noticed something was off. The living room, usually a sanctuary of our shared life, felt foreign. The photos of us on the walls, smiling and carefree, seemed to mock me. I walked toward the bedroom, and that's when I heard it, a muffled voice coming from behind the closed door. My heart raced as I approached, each step heavy with dread. I pressed my ear against the door, straining to catch the words. It was unmistakably Sarah's voice, but it was the other voice that sent a jolt of realization through me. I knew that voice. It was Mark, our landlord. A chill spread through my body. As I recalled the late-night conversations they had shared, the flirty banter that had always made me uneasy. I had brushed it off as harmless, but now, standing there, the truth hit me like a punch to the gut. My wife was having an affair with the man who held the keys to our home. I pushed the door open, and the sight before me was one I would never forget. Sarah was sitting on the edge of our bed, looking disheveled and guilty, while Mark stood awkwardly, half-dressed. Shock in their faces mirrored my own, and for a moment time stood still. I felt a mix of anger and heartbreak, a cocktail of emotions that left me reeling. How could she do this to us, to me? The man who had stood by her through thick and thin. What the hell is going on here? I demanded, my voice shaking with rage. The words spilled out before I could stop myself, a desperate attempt to grasp the reality of the situation. Sarah's eyes widened, and she opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. Mark, on the other hand, shifted uncomfortably, looking like a deer caught in headlights. My heart raced as I felt the betrayal wrap around me, squeezing tighter with each passing second. "Get out," I said to Mark, my voice low and dangerous. He hesitated, glancing at Sarah, but I didn't care about his indecision. I wanted him gone, out of my life. As he slipped past me, I could feel the heat radiating from my body, a mix of anger and sorrow. Once the door closed behind him, I turned my full attention to Sarah. The tears streaming down her face only fueled my anger. "How could you?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "I can explain," she pleaded, but I couldn't bear to hear her excuses. I had once thought our love was unbreakable, but now it felt like shattered glass cutting deep into my heart. The confrontation turned into a blur of accusations and tears, a cacophony of pain that echoed in our small apartment. She tried to explain, but all I could focus on was the betrayal etched in her eyes. I could still hear the laughter we had shared just days before, now tainted by the knowledge of her infidelity. I felt like a fool, a man who had trusted her completely, only to find that trust was misplaced. The walls that once felt like a sanctuary now felt like a prison, each corner whispering secrets I wished I could unhear. I wanted to scream, to lash out, but instead I stood there, paralyzed by the weight of my emotions. After what felt like an eternity, I finally managed to find my voice again. "I need some time to think," I said, my tone flat. I turned and walked out of the room, leaving her to deal with the mess she had created. As I stepped outside into the cool evening air, I took a deep breath, trying to clear my mind. The world around me felt surreal, as if I were moving through a dream. I had never imagined that our life together could unravel so quickly, but now everything was different. I was no longer just a husband. I was a man betrayed, and the pain of that betrayal was just beginning to sink in. The days that followed were a blur of confusion and heartache. I stayed away from home as much as possible, seeking refuge in the office or drowning my sorrows at the local bar. Each time I returned, I was met with the same oppressive silence that seemed to hang in the air like a storm cloud. Sarah and I avoided each other, our once vibrant marriage reduced to awkward glances and forced conversations. The weight of her betrayal loomed over us, suffocating any remnants of the love we had shared. It was during one of those strained conversations that I finally confronted her again. I had been pacing the living room trying to gather my thoughts when I turned to her and asked, "Why him? Why Mark?" The question came out sharper than I intended, but I needed answers, and I needed them now. She looked at me, her eyes filled with regret and shame. "It just happened," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't plan for it. I was feeling lost, and Mark was. There. Lost." I snapped, the anger boiling over. "You think that's an excuse? You think having an affair is the answer to feeling lost?" Her silence spoke volumes, and in that moment I felt my heart shatter further. I had always considered Sarah to be my partner, my confidant. Now, she was just a stranger, and I struggled to reconcile the woman I loved with the one standing before me, tear-stained and remorseful. As the days passed, I began to piece together the timeline of her affair. I recalled how Mark had always been overly friendly, how Sarah had laughed a little too hard at his jokes during our landlord-tenant interactions. I remembered the late-night phone calls and the sudden bursts of texting that she had claimed were work-related. The realization hit me hard. I had been blind to the signs, too trusting to see the truth. One evening, I returned home unexpectedly, intending to confront her again. I opened the door to find Sarah on the couch, her phone in hand, the glow of the screen illuminating her face. As I stepped inside, she quickly hid the phone behind her back, but not before I caught a glimpse of a message. It was from Mark, something innocuous like, "Can't wait to see you again." My heart raced and I felt a surge of anger. I demanded to see the message, but she hesitated, the guilt evident on her face. "It's not what you think," she stammered, but I could see the panic in her eyes. "Then show me," I shouted, frustration boiling over. With trembling hands, she handed me the phone. I scanned the messages, my heart sinking further with each word. It was filled with flirtation, inside jokes, and plans for secret meetings. Each line felt like a dagger twisting deeper into my heart. I could feel the room closing in on me. The walls that once felt safe now felt like a cage. "You were planning to meet him again?" I asked, my voice low and controlled, though inside I was screaming. She hung her head, unable to meet my gaze. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I never meant for it to happen. I don't know." The truth was I didn't want to hear her excuses anymore. I felt a mixture of anger and pity, but mostly I felt betrayed. I had given her everything, and she had thrown it away for a fleeting thrill. In that moment, I realized that our marriage was beyond repair. It wasn't just the affair that hurt. It was the realization that the woman I thought I knew had chosen someone else over me. As the weight of her infidelity settled in, I began to contemplate my next steps. I had always been the one to shoulder the burdens in our relationship, the one who made the sacrifices. Now, it was time to think about myself. I couldn't continue living in this twisted reality. I needed to take control, to reclaim my life in whatever way I could. That night I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. I felt a sense of clarity wash over me, a determination to not let her actions define my future. I could choose to wallow in pain or take a stand. That's when the idea hit me. What if I stopped paying rent? What if I let her deal with the consequences of her actions? It was a drastic decision, one that would undoubtedly lead to chaos, but I didn't care. I wanted her to feel the weight of her choices, to understand the repercussions of what she had done. I wanted her to experience the same helplessness I felt in that moment. And so, my plan began to take shape. The next few days were filled with a simmering determination. I kept replaying the events in my mind, the discovery of Sarah's affair, the confrontation, and the hollow feeling that had taken root in my chest. Each time I thought about it, a fire ignited within me. I had given her everything, and now I was left with nothing but the wreckage of our marriage. It was time to take action. I remember standing in front of the bathroom mirror one morning, getting ready for work. I looked at my reflection, searching for the man I used to be, the man filled with hope and love. Instead, I found someone who felt betrayed and broken. I knew I had to reclaim my power, so I made the decision to stop paying rent. It was a hard choice, but it felt like the only way to regain some semblance of control over my life. I wanted Sarah to face the consequences of her actions, to understand that her choices had repercussions that extended beyond our marriage. The idea of eviction was terrifying, but it also felt strangely liberating. I would no longer be the one who absorbed the pain. while she continued to live her life as if nothing had happened. I started calculating how long it would take before we faced eviction. I knew our landlord, Mark, would not be sympathetic to our situation. Once the rent stopped coming in, I imagined the eviction notices piling up on our door, each one a reminder of her betrayal. The thought sent a rush of adrenaline through me. I could almost see her face when the reality of her choices hit her. At work, my mind was a whirlwind of thoughts. I found it hard to concentrate, my focus drifting off to the plan I was formulating. I started to picture the conversation I would have with Sarah when the eviction notice arrived. I could visualize her panic, her desperation, and the way she would plead for my help. But this time, I wouldn't be there to save her. I felt a mix of excitement and dread as I prepared to execute my plan. I had always been the one to smooth things over, the peacemaker in our relationship. But now, I was ready to become the man who would make her face the consequences. The longer I thought about it, the more justified I felt. On the evening I decided to put my plan into action, I sat down with a pen and paper, jotting down my thoughts. I felt a strange sense of clarity as I wrote out the reasons for my decision. I wanted her to know that her actions had consequences. I wanted her to understand that I would no longer be her safety net. With each word I wrote, I felt the weight of the world slowly lifting off my shoulders. I was taking control of my life, and it felt empowering. I thought about how she had betrayed my trust and the love we had built over the years. I remembered the times we had spent together, the dreams we had shared, and how easily she had thrown it all away. The decision to stop paying rent wasn't just about the money. It was about making a statement. I wanted her to feel the pain I felt, to experience the helplessness of being backed into a corner. I wanted her to understand the gravity of her choices, and I was determined to make that happen. I spent the next few weeks preparing for the fallout. I stopped all communication about finances with Sarah. I didn't want to give her any indication of my plans. I wanted her to be blindsided when the eviction notice arrived. I was cold and calculated, and it surprised me how easy it was to shut off my emotions. As the days turned into weeks, my resolve only strengthened. I thought about the moment I would finally reveal my decision to her. I envisioned her face when she realized the gravity of the situation, the desperation in her eyes as she faced the truth of what she had done. But even as I felt empowered, a small part of me grappled with guilt. Was I being too harsh? Was I justified in letting her face the consequences alone? I pushed those thoughts aside, reminding myself of her betrayal. She had made her choices. Now it was my turn to make mine. The day finally arrived when I made my first missed rent payment. I felt a rush of adrenaline course through my veins, and I knew there was no turning back. I had crossed a line, but in that moment I felt a sense of liberation. I was no longer the victim, I was the one in control. As I lay in bed that night, I couldn't help but think about what would come next. I was ready to face the chaos that would inevitably follow. I was ready to watch Sarah unravel as the reality of her actions set in. It was time for her to confront the mess she had created. The first eviction notice arrived a month after I had stopped paying rent. I remember the moment vividly. It was a Wednesday evening, and I had just returned home from work. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow through the living room window, but the warmth did little to alleviate the chill that crept into my bones as I saw the envelope lying on the kitchen counter. It was marked with bold letters, "Notice to quit." My heart raced as I picked it up, and I could feel the weight of the impending storm. I had been anticipating this moment, and yet, as I held the notice in my hands, a wave of uncertainty washed over me. I had taken this step to regain control, but now that the moment had come, I felt an unsettling mix of satisfaction and dread. I took a deep breath and called out to Sarah, who was in the bedroom. She appeared moments later, her expression curious. "What's that?" she asked, glancing at the envelope in my hand. I could see the flicker of hope in her eyes, a desperate wish that it might be something good, but I knew better. I held the notice up, watching as her face fell. "It's our eviction notice," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, but the tremor in my tone betrayed me. For a moment she just stared at the paper, her expression shifting from confusion to disbelief. "What do you mean? Why would we get an eviction notice?" She stammered, her voice rising in pitch. I felt a surge of satisfaction at her confusion. Because I stopped paying rent, I replied, watching as the reality of my actions sunk in. Her eyes widened with panic. "You what?" she shouted, the color draining from her face. "You can't be serious. You just let it happen." I stood my ground, watching her reaction unfold like a slow-motion train wreck. "You think I would continue to pay for a place that you've treated like a playground for your affair? You wanted to play with fire, Sarah. Now you're getting burned." Her expression shifted from shock to anger in an instant. "This isn't fair. You can't just leave me to deal with this," she yelled, her voice cracking. "I thought we were in this together." "Together?" I echoed, incredulous. "You made a choice to betray me. You made a choice to sleep with our landlord. This is the consequence of your actions, and now you have to face it." The look on her face was one I had never seen before, pure desperation mixed with rage. "You're being cruel," she said, her voice trembling. "You're punishing me for something I regret. Can't we just talk about this?" I shook my head. "There's nothing left to talk about. You made your bed and now you have to lie in it." The chaos that ensued was a whirlwind of emotions. Sarah's anger turned into frantic pleading. She begged me to reconsider, to help her find a way out of this mess. But I remained resolute. I had made my decision, and I wouldn't back down. As the days turned into weeks, the reality of our situation began to sink in. The eviction notices kept coming, one after another, each one a stark reminder of her choices. I watched as Sarah's demeanor changed, the confidence she once had slowly eroding into despair. She began to panic, scrambling to find a way to save our home. I could see the toll it was taking on her. Her eyes were sunken, her skin pale. It was almost surreal to witness. I had imagined her facing the consequences with some semblance of grace, but instead she was unraveling before my eyes. One evening, as I returned home from work, I found her sitting on the couch, surrounded by stacks of bills and eviction notices. The sight struck me, a mix of emotions swirling within me. Part of me felt a sense of satisfaction, but another part felt an unexpected pang of guilt. "I can't do this alone," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I need your help. I can't lose this place. It's all I have left. Maybe you should have thought about that before you started sleeping with our landlord." I shot back, my voice laced with bitterness. She looked up at me, tears streaming down her face. "I know I messed up. I'm sorry. I didn't mean for it to happen, but I can't lose everything because of one mistake." I felt a flicker of sympathy, but I quickly pushed it aside. "You should have thought about the consequences before you made your choices," I said coldly. As the eviction date loomed closer, I could see the desperation in her eyes turn into panic. She started reaching out to family and friends, trying to borrow money, but the responses were often unkind. The truth was, no one wanted to get involved in our mess. I watched her struggle, and while a part of me felt vindicated, another part felt hollow. I was witnessing the fallout of her actions, but I was also witnessing the disintegration of the person I had once loved. One night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was losing a part of myself in this process. I had taken a stand, but at what cost? Was I really any better than her for letting her suffer? As the eviction date approached, I knew the chaos would only intensify. I was ready to face the fallout, but deep down, I was grappling with the emotional scars that would remain long after the dust settled. I had set out to make her feel the consequences of her choices, but I was beginning to wonder if I had underestimated the impact it would have on both of us. As the eviction day drew closer, I found myself in a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. I had set out on this path with a sense of purpose, a desire to make Sarah face the consequences of her betrayal. Yet, as I watched her unravel, I couldn't help but question my own motives. Was I truly justified in my actions, or had I become the very thing I despised? The night before the eviction, I sat alone in the living room, the weight of silence pressing down on me. The eviction notice was still taped to the front door, a stark reminder of the chaos that was about to unfold. I could hear Sarah in the bedroom, her muffled sobs echoing through the walls. I felt a pang of sorrow, but I quickly brushed it aside. She had made her choices, she had brought this upon herself. But as I sat there, I began to reflect on the love we had once shared. I thought about the moments that had defined our relationship, the laughter, the late-night talks, the dreams we had built together. Those memories felt like ghosts now, haunting me as I faced the reality of our situation. I had thought that by taking control, I could reclaim my life, but instead I found myself drowning in a sea of regret. The morning of the eviction was cold and gray, mirroring the turmoil within me. I woke up to the sound of Sarah's quiet sobs. I had grown accustomed to her tears, but this felt different. I could sense her despair, a palpable weight that hung in the air. I got out of bed and walked to the living room, where the eviction notice remained a glaring reminder of the chaos I had orchestrated. When I finally confronted her, I found her sitting on the edge of the bed, her face buried in her hands. "What are we going to do?" she asked, her voice trembling. I looked at her, taking in the woman I once loved, now reduced to a shell of her former self. "This is your mess, Sarah," I replied, my voice steady but devoid of warmth. "You wanted to play, and now you have to deal with the consequences." "But I can't lose everything," she pleaded, desperation etched on her face. "I'm sorry for what I did. I didn't mean for it to go this far." The sincerity in her voice tugged at my heart, but I quickly steeled myself. "You should have thought about that before you slept with Mark. I'm not here to save you." As the hours ticked by, I felt an unsettling mix of satisfaction and guilt. I had made my point. I had shown her that actions have consequences. But as I watched her spiral further into despair, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was losing a part of myself in the process. When the eviction team arrived, I felt a strange sense of detachment. I watched as the reality of our situation unfolded: Sarah's panic, the chaos of packing up our belongings, the look of defeat in her eyes. I had wanted her to feel the weight of her choices, but I hadn't anticipated the depth of her suffering. As we stood on the curb, surrounded by boxes, I felt an unexpected wave of empathy wash over me. This was not the woman who had betrayed me. This was a woman facing the consequences of her actions, a woman who had lost everything. The pain I had inflicted seemed to echo back to me, and I couldn't help but wonder if I had gone too far. "Do you regret it?" she asked quietly, her eyes searching mine for answers. I hesitated, the weight of her question hanging in the air. "Regret what? That you cheated, or that I stopped paying rent?" She looked down, her shoulders slumping. "I regret everything." In that moment, I realized that we were both victims of our choices. I had sought revenge, but in doing so, I had become a prisoner of my own bitterness. I had wanted her to feel the pain I felt, but now I was left grappling with the consequences of my actions as well. As we stood there, surrounded by the remnants of our life together, I felt the walls closing in. The anger that had fueled my decisions was now replaced by a heavy sense of loss. I had set out to teach her a lesson, but I had learned one myself. Revenge doesn't bring closure, it only deepens the wounds. In the days that followed, I found myself reflecting on trust and relationships. I had always believed that love could conquer all, but now I understood that trust, once broken, is a hard thing to rebuild. The betrayal had shattered my perception of love, and I was left with the remnants of a life that once felt whole. As I packed up my own belongings and prepared to leave our apartment for good, I felt a strange sense of clarity. I had lost a part of myself in this ordeal, but I was determined to reclaim my life, one step at a time. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew I had to move forward. The lessons learned from this experience were painful, but they were necessary. I had learned about the fragility of trust, the consequences of betrayal, and the importance of standing up for myself. It was time to let go of the past and embrace the uncertainty of the future. As I moved out of our apartment, I felt a mixture of relief and sorrow. The place that had once been a sanctuary for our love now felt like a tomb, filled with memories that haunted me. I had taken my stand, and while it had brought me a sense of control, it had also cost me dearly. I was leaving behind not just a home, but the remnants of a life I had thought would last forever. The days that followed were filled with uncertainty. I found a small apartment on the other side of town, a far cry from the cozy space I had shared with Sarah. It was stark and bare, but it was mine, a blank canvas where I could begin to rebuild. I spent my evenings unpacking boxes, trying to fill the emptiness that had settled within me. I surrounded myself with reminders of who I was before the betrayal, books I loved, photographs of friends and mementos from my travels. As I settled into my new life, I found myself reflecting on the lessons learned from my experience. Trust, I realized, is the foundation of any relationship, and once it's broken, it's incredibly difficult to rebuild. I had thought that by inflicting pain on Sarah, I could heal my own wounds, but instead, I had only deepened them. Revenge had felt satisfying in the moment, but it had left me feeling hollow and lost. In the weeks that followed, I began to make sense of my feelings. I sought therapy, a decision that brought unexpected clarity. Talking through my emotions helped me process the betrayal, the anger, and the confusion. I learned that it was okay to feel hurt, but I also learned that I had to let go of the bitterness that threatened to consume me. I began to focus on myself, pursuing hobbies I had neglected and reconnecting with friends I had lost touch with during my marriage. Slowly, I started to rediscover who I was outside of my relationship with Sarah. I found joy in simple things, long walks in the park, evenings spent reading, and quiet moments of reflection. Time passed, and while the memories of Sarah still lingered, they no longer held the same power over me. I began to understand that the end of our marriage didn't define me. It was merely a chapter in my life. I had emerged from the experience scarred but stronger, ready to embrace new beginnings. One day, as I was walking through a local cafe, I spotted a familiar face. It was Sarah, sitting at a table with a friend, her hair pulled back and a warm smile on her face. My heart raced, and for a moment I felt the old emotions bubble up: anger, sadness, regret. But as I watched her laugh, I realized that I had moved on. The pain of betrayal had transformed into a lesson learned, a stepping stone toward a brighter future. I took a deep breath and walked past her, feeling a sense of closure wash over me. I had learned the hard way about trust, betrayal, and the consequences of our choices. But I had also learned about resilience, about the strength that lies within us to rise above our circumstances. As I stepped outside into the sunlight, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. I was ready to embrace whatever came next, to open my heart to new experiences and relationships. The scars from my past would always be a part of me, but they no longer defined who I was. I had grown, and I was ready to move forward. In the end, I discovered that healing is a journey, not a destination. It takes time, reflection, and a willingness to let go of the past. I had taken my stand, and while it had brought chaos into my life, it had also led me to a place of understanding and growth. I was no longer the man who had sought revenge. I was a man ready to reclaim his life, one step at a time. With that realization, I walked away from the cafe, ready to embrace the future, whatever it may hold. And in that moment, I knew I had learned the most important lesson of all. Life goes on, and so must I. Thank you for following my journey.